Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 89 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, September 26, 2023, the committee is meeting to proceed with the clause-by-clause of Bill C-33, an act to amend the Customs Act, the Railway Safety Act, the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act 1992, the Marine Transportation Security Act, the Canada Transportation Act, and the Canada Marine Act, and to make consequential amendments to another act. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely by using the Zoom application. Colleagues, to help us today with the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-33, the first piece of legislation sent to our committee in this session, I would now like to welcome our witnesses. From the Canada Border Services Agency, we have Kathy Toxopias, Director General, Transformation Planning and Projects. Welcome. We have Sean Zink, Manager, Traveller, Commercial and Trade Policy Directorate by video conference. From the Department of Transport, we have Sonia Reid, Director General, Marine Policy. Stephen Scott, Director General, Rail Safety. Heather Moriarty, Director, Ports Policy. Aidan Ryan, Director, Marine Security Operations. Rachel Heft, Manager and Senior Counsel, Transportation and Infrastructure Legal Services. And Amy Kaufman, Counsel. Welcome to you all. And we also have joining us the legislative clerks, Philippe Mila and Jean-François Pagé. Bienvenue à vous deux. Pursuant to Standing Order 75, colleagues, consideration of Clause 1, short title, is postponed, and therefore I call Clause 2.
Mr. Speaker,
I see your hands up, Mr. Strahl.
Yes, I'm sorry. Before we get started on the clause-by-clause, I wanted to move the motion that I submitted during the break week to which I can read here into the record, which says that pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, November 9th, 2023, the Minister of Transport and Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities appear before the committee for no fewer than 2 hours each to consider the supplementary estimates B before Friday, December 1st, 2023. So I'd like to move that motion and have a discussion. We obviously always invite the ministers to appear when they table, when estimates are tabled, and we would like them to come and defend those estimates before the committee here. So I move that motion and would ask that we have a discussion about that right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. So moved. Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would support the intent of the motion with respect to having the ministers here. However, I would respect their schedules and simply ask that they would be here. I wouldn't necessarily put it down to December 1st or before December 1st, and, but to request both ministers to be here at their time frame, hopefully before the break, the holiday break would be appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Back to you, Mr. Strahl.
I think we simply would like them to come before the matters are automatically deemed reported to the House, which I understand is why that date is in place. So I don't think there's any harm in asking them to come before that, but we would certainly welcome them to come on the estimates even after they have been deemed reported. But that is why the date is what it is to an attempt to have us consider and vote on the estimates before they are simply deemed reported to the House. So that's the reason for that date.
Thank you. Mr. Badaway.
I would suggest that we amend the motion to remove December 1st as a deadline, as well as both ministers to attend for 1 hour each.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Discussions on the amendment. Oui, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
I'd like to get an explanation from Mr. Badaway on the second part of his amendment. I've understood that he wants to delete the question of dates to have some flexibility. We're studying a bill at the moment, after all. I understand that. But I don't know why you want to withdraw the appearance of the ministers each for 1 hour. Why do you want to remove that part from the amendment? Can you please clarify? Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Mr. Badaway.
Our schedule. We're busy, and we have work to do. So I'm being around here for the last 8 years. I'm sure we can deal with this for an hour apiece with each minister.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Any other questions, comments on the amendment put forward by Mr. Badaway? Seeing none, we'll go to a vote on the amendment. All those in favor? On the amendment. All those opposed? Abstentions? I didn't see you vote, Mr. Beck. You're opposed. Okay. So the amendment fails. We'll now go back to the motion put forward by Mr. Strahl. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of the amendment proposed by Mr. Strahl? All those opposed? The motion is, going to confer with the clerk, defeated? The motion is defeated. Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Strahl. We'll now go back to, yes, Dr. Lewis.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a motion that has been put on notice as of Friday, November the 17th, and the motion was distributed to all the committee members in both official languages, and it is as follows. Given that the Canada Infrastructure Bank, A, has spent more and in some years double on consultants, CEO payouts, executive bonuses, and salaries that on actual infrastructure projects. B, paid out bonuses to each of its executives for fiscal years 2020 to 2021 and 2021 to 2022, totaling $14.6 million, despite no completed infrastructure projects. C, the gap between spending on salaries and spending on projects continues to widen year over year. The committee recognized that the Canada Infrastructure Bank has not met expectations for the responsible use of taxpayer dollars in light of increasing overhead, salaries, and bonuses without proportionate spending on infrastructure projects and without visible results for Canadians, and that the committee report this opinion to the House. Mr. Chair, I'd like to comment on the motion.
Please do.
I'm raising this motion today because I believe that it's incumbent on this committee to continue to hold the government's $35 billion infrastructure bank accountable for its performance, especially considering the billions that it's already responsible for. Despite this committee's review of the bank back in 2022 that made one single recommendation, and that recommendation was to abolish this failed infrastructure bank, the government has still not acted on this committee's recommendation, nor has it even acknowledged our concerns. Almost 6.5 years ago, or the bank has been in operation for almost 6.5 years, and the numbers are clear. The bank seems to prioritize rewarding well-paid executives with bonuses over getting important infrastructure built for Canadians. And it's not just one or two executives that are getting these bonuses. The bank has given bonuses to each of its executives for the last 2 fiscal years, for which we have the data to prove this. Also, with each year, we are seeing that the amount paid on salaries and bonuses go up, and the amount spent on infrastructure is actually going down. The Liberal Bank, and it's clear that this Liberal infrastructural bank is just not worth the cost to taxpayers. While it is appropriate that well-paid executives are each getting bonuses for not getting results done, at a time when most Canadians are being asked to tighten their budgets because of this government's inflationary deficits. At a time when we are seeing the highest number of visits to food banks, at a time when we're seeing Canadians who are afraid of not having enough money to pay their mortgages and to feed their families, this is a very, very important issue to take into consideration now. And I hope that this committee will agree that it's important to convey this opinion to the House. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Any comments, questions, colleagues? Yes, Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I stated at a previous meeting, when a previous iteration of this motion came forward, the NDP shares deep concerns about the Canada Infrastructure Bank and its fixation on delivering private profits. when building public infrastructure. And we also share the concerns about the track record of the bank so far and its inability to get projects built. However, I would say two things. First of all, I'm a little bit concerned that this is part of the ongoing Conservative project to obstruct other subjects in the House. So because we've already, as a committee, clearly articulated our desire that the CIB be abolished through the recommendation in our report, I would just offer I'm not sure that this is going to advance that effort in any meaningful way. But the other concern I have is that point C, it says the gap between spending on salaries and spending on projects continues to widen. Now, if spending on salaries is going up and spending on projects is either stagnant or going down, then the gap would actually be narrowing. So I'm just a little bit unclear on what's being said here, because clearly we don't want the spending on salaries to catch up with the spending on projects. I think it's pretty clear that the bank is spending less on salaries than it's spending on projects. And so if the intention is that the bank should be spending less on salaries and more on projects, my concern is that the wording of the motion actually suggests the opposite. It's expressing that the concern that the gap between spending on salaries and spending on projects continues to widen. If the bank were successful and we're building all kinds of infrastructure projects across the country and spending more and more of its endowment, then the gap would widen. One would hope. One would hope that the spending on salaries wasn't going to keep up with the pace of spending on infrastructure projects. So I'm just a little bit worried that we're sending an unclear message and muddying the waters when the concern is really that, obviously the executives on the bank are being compensated fairly richly, and the bank's performance to date hasn't been anything to scream about. So I don't think I can support the motion as written. I'm concerned it sends an unclear message on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Barcelou-Duval?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Well, unless there are people around the table who want to move amendments, I think we should be able to deal with this motion quickly. I agree with the content of this. The government has not listened to the recommendation from the committee. I think it's quite clear, the motion, but at the same time, we've got work to do today. So if we could quickly get down to our bill, in fact, the government bill, which is now before the committee, then I think that could step up the pace. So let's try and decide on this as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Other colleagues?
Oh, Mr. Bachrach?
With an amendment, Mr. Chair, that item C, bullet C be struck from the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Questions, comments on Mr. Bachrach's amendment? Seeing none, we'll go to a vote on Mr. Bachrach's amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? The amendment does not carry. We'll now go to the main motion. Seeing no additional questions or comments, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of the amendment proposed by Dr. Lewis? All those opposed? It's defeated. The motion is defeated. Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Yes, Mr. Bachrach.
Not to be left out of this, emotional moment. I will also move a motion that was put on notice last week or the week prior to the riding week, that given multiple recent reports of persons with disabilities facing discrimination and unacceptable treatment while traveling with Canadian Airlines, and given that Air Canada admitted it violated Canadian disability regulations, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities undertake a study on the state of accessible transportation for persons with disabilities on Canadian Airlines, and the Accessible Transportation for Persons with Disabilities regulations, that the committee invite the Minister for Transport, the CEOs of Air Canada and WestJet, the Auditor General of Canada, experts and other stakeholders, that the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings and report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Questions or comments, colleagues? Mr. Strahl.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess I had a couple of questions for Mr. Bachrach. I understand that the Human Resources Committee, which has persons with disabilities under its purview, has taken up this matter as well, the matter of Air Canada and the terrible situations that have been coming to light through the media. So I guess my question is this necessary? Well, what is the difference between what will be happening at HUMA, which does deal with accessibility and disability issues all the time? They've already approved a motion, so I guess that would be my first question for him. Secondly, I do think there is, if we're going to talk about accessibility in the transportation sector, we perhaps shouldn't just focus on the 2 major airlines, but should be looking at anything from other modes of transport to certainly to airports when we're talking about the experience of individuals who are traveling with disabilities through our airports and on our air carriers. So just a couple of questions about why the narrow focus and why are we bringing it here when HUMA has already has a motion that is actively under consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to Mr. Strahl for the questions. My understanding is that HUMA has called the CEO of Air Canada, and that their hearings into this are somewhat limited in scope. I think his other question around whether we should be expanding the scope slightly to include other organizations in the air transport space, I think that's a very valid one. Certainly understanding the interaction between airports and the airlines when it comes to persons with disabilities navigating our air transport sector would be helpful. And really, you know, this is a transport topic, and this is the Transport Committee, and I think our focus will really be on how does the Canadian air transport system deliver equitable services to all Canadians, and how can the really egregious examples that we've seen in the media recently be avoided and remedied through whether it's regulation or legislation. Obviously, there need to be steps taken, and what we've seen so far to date is just nice words. We've seen apologies and we've seen commitments to do better, but the government is in a position to ensure that this never happens again by making it very clear to the airlines and to other players in the air sector that it won't be tolerated, and articulating the standard of care that should be taken. So I take his point, and I would certainly welcome. I do think that experts and other stakeholders could be interpreted to include more broadly airports, the Canadian Transportation Agency, and other organizations that would be relevant. But if Mr. Strahl would like that articulated specifically in the motion, I'd be happy to accept an amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Any other questions, comments, colleagues? Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I agree with the premise of the motion, but I do agree with Mr. Strahl. This has already been looked at by a committee. We have a full slate, probably leading us into the spring. And what I would ask Mr. Bachrach to consider is simply let's wait for that report from HUMA to come out, see what it states, and if in fact we want to pursue it after that fact to add to the report or align with the report, we can do it then. But I think at this point in time, it's where it should be, and we can deal with it once it's complete at that committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. Mr. Strahl.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things, and again, this is a bit of internal, perhaps a committee business, but when the NDP was scheduled to bring forward an item for consideration in terms of our ordering of our studies, Mr. Bachrach surrendered some of those meetings so that we would have a more robust discussion on high frequency rail. But there was, I guess, my question is this a new study, or does this fill out the NDP's we've given a lot of leeway in this committee when a party brings forward an item for study in their designated slot. We've kind of allowed them to lead the way on that. So I guess my question, and maybe it goes to you, Mr. Chair, as well as to Mr. Bachrach, is this fitting into that, or is this another study that will be thrown into the hopper when we do order our studies going forward? So just a little bit of clarity as to the sequencing here. When would this come up? And if we do, I would move an amendment after I hear that to include airports and the Canadian Transportation Agency to the list of invited witnesses. But first, I'd like to get an understanding of when this might be considered.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. I'll turn it over to Mr. Bachrach.
Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Strahl. I think because this issue facing people with disabilities who are trying to travel using Canada's airlines is quite a pressing one. And so that's why we brought this motion forward, because it's timely and it's something that needs to be addressed in short order. With regard to the prioritization of this study relative to other studies, I'm happy to have that conversation at our next committee business meeting. However, given the timeliness of this, given the priority that it deserves, I think that the committee would really benefit from tackling this sooner than later, and we'd be happy to discuss its priority relative to our other studies that we've brought forward. The last thing I'll mention is just that HUMA has only dedicated 1 hour to this topic. It's unclear whether they plan to report to the House. So I do think the complexity of the issue deserves more than 1 hour of study. And so hopefully HUMA's work can be a bit of a springboard to our more comprehensive work, inviting a larger number of witnesses and diving into it a little bit deeper.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Badaway?
Sorry, are you talking about having this done after HUMA's report, or at the same time, or before it?
Well, I don't have the dates sorry, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Badaway. I don't have the dates that HUMA is planning to. I don't know if someone else around the table knows when they plan to hear from Air Canada's CEO. But my sense was that it was in fairly short order. We're not going to get to this study until after the study on passenger rail is complete, unless I'm mistaken. And so my assumption would be that it would take place after HUMA has had a chance to question the CEO.
Thank you. Mr. Badaway.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, why don't we find that out in terms of when they're going to be dealing with it? And why don't we also, in terms of Mrs. Strahl's question, look at when we're going to queue this up? Because we do have, as I said earlier, we do have a heavy agenda, probably leading us into the spring. So why don't we discuss this after getting that information at a business planning meeting? And that way we can queue it up for Mr. Bachrach and go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. I'll turn it over. I saw Mr. Strahl's hands up, and then I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Strahl.
Yeah, I would just, regardless of when I can, if depending on what Mr. Bachrach wants to do here, I do want to get the list to be a little more comprehensive. So, I would move an amendment if he was willing to accept it, to include, after, in his motion, it says that the committee invite the Minister for Transport, the CEOs of Air Canada and WestJet, the Auditor General of Canada, airports, and the Canada Transportation Agency, experts and other stakeholders. So I would like to add airports and the CTA into his motion before we vote on it. But that would be my preference. And again, I'm open to the timing on this, but I think we do want to send a message that it is an important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. Mr. Bachrach.
I appreciate Mr. Strahl offering it as a friendly amendment. I think I would accept it even if it wasn't friendly. And so I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want to ask for unanimous consent to expand the wording of the motion, but I'd be happy to see the wording amended accordingly.
Sure, why don't we go ahead and do that? Do we have unanimous consent of members to amend the wording of the motion? I see unanimous consent.
And then the last thing I'll add, Mr. Chair, is that we can vote on this motion. It simply indicates that the committee intends to study this matter at some point, and then we can discuss prioritization and timing perhaps at the next business meeting of the committee.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Mr. Batterway for one last thought on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I have to say is that we are looking to have some substance to this study, in particular as it relates to who we should be dialoguing with. I'll say it that way. I'm being polite here because of the situation that happened. Those folks that are accountable for that situation, especially in the air sector. Having said that, although we can invite the minister out, I think the minister has been very clear and put on record in terms of what his thoughts are on this, as well as his actions. I think what's most important here is that we actually get the people that are most accountable for this, and actually and really zero in and get down to how they're going to deal with it, and some of the things that we may be able to put in place to in fact make sure that happens. I think that's the crux and that's the priority of this motion is to get to that discussion, and hopefully we can get a resolve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Batterway. Okay, so I think we're all clear on this, colleagues. I think there is a desire to adopt the study as amended in terms of the wording and who's going to be appearing. So I'll go to a vote on this. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. I'm going to do one last turn around here to see if there's anything else that would like to be presented or spoken to before we move on to Clause 2 of Bill C-33. Seeing none, I guess I'll go to our first vote. Shall Clause 2 carry?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Bachrach.
Recorded votes on the clause?
I can definitely do that. Is it the will of the committee? Yes? Okay. We'll go to recorded votes. Shall Clause 2 carry?
Mr. Batterway?
Yes.
Mr. Iacono? Ms. Kotrakis?
Oui.
Ms. Murray? Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Strahl?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Ms. Lewis?
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval? Mr. Bachrach? 7 yeas, 4 nays.
Merci. Clause 2 is carried. We'll go to Clause 3.
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Strahl?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Dr. Lewis?
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval? Mr. Bachrach? 7 yeas, 4 nays.
Merci beaucoup. We'll go to Clause 4.
Mr. Batterway?
Yes.
Mr. Iacono? Ms. Kotrakis?
Oui.
Ms. Murray? Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Strahl?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Dr. Lewis?
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval? Mr. Bachrach? 7 yeas, 4 nays.
Merci. Clause 4 carries. We'll now go to Clause 5 and CPC 1, and for that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Strahl.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And this amendment responds to the concerns of the railway companies who have expressed an interest in having separate and more robust definitions for safety and security in the bill. So this would ensure that the respective requirements apply only where appropriate within the Railway Safety Act.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. Any questions or comments, colleagues? Yes, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question I have for the team that we have here today. I would like to first ask officials what this change would mean for the bill and the acts that are being amended by C-33.
I can speak to that, Chair. So it really is about migrating over the basket of tools and authorities that exist on the safety side in the Railway Safety Act and bringing them over in a clean and comprehensive way to the security side of the bill, the Railway Safety Act, because currently those tools and powers exist in a bit of a patchwork way on the security side. So having a combined definition will bring that over and ensure all the tools and authorities needed to do security functions are there in the same manner that they're there to do safety.
So I guess my question would be that while it may seem like a simple solution, would the amendment create additional gaps, especially with respect to safety and security? Would it be interpreted that way in the Railway Safety Act?
So a couple of considerations. So having separate definitions would involve a series, many consequential amendments throughout the entirety of the Railway Safety Act to parse out the individual powers that are there now and basically identify or tag them to either safety or security, which, given the evolving nature of safety and security scenarios over time, could create a future gap in authorities.
So just on that comment, would C-33, as it's written now, assume that safety also includes security?
Yeah, that's correct, yes. Currently, there is no definition of safety in the Act, so by adding a definition that includes security, it'll ensure, as I say, a comprehensive application of tools and regulation-making powers for both safety and security scenarios going forward.
Great, thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I can't support this because this amendment would create, from what I'm hearing, a multitude, a cascade of other issues, and the need to make additional amendments and other existing pieces of legislation, again, such as the Railway Safety Act. It would create more issues, which would require us to define safety and security, as I mentioned earlier in terms of my question, in every existing piece of legislation and every clause that mentions safety and security. So once again, I believe that C-33, as written, assumes that safety also includes security. So it's there. So for that reason, I would not support this.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Turn it over to Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is an interesting one because what has been proposed in this amendment is simply splitting the definition so that there's a separate definition for security and a separate definition for safety. And I wonder if the officials could outline for us in a little bit more detail what the ramifications of that would be in terms of the need for other amendments. Like, does this create situation where you have other parts of other bills that are then going to need to be amended in order to specify whether it's safety or security that is being dealt with? Is that a clear enough question?
Thank you for the question. It would require that in every instance where the term safety is used in the Railway Safety Act, that an amendment be included to say, and security. So where it says safety currently, it would include security, and if it didn't include the word and security, or those terms, then there would be a gap.
And I guess the corollary to that is the question, like, are there situations where treating safety and security with the same definition and assuming that everywhere safety is mentioned, it also means security, would create issues because actually they should be dealt with separately. And I note that safety management systems are specifically set aside as only having to do with safety. Are there other instances where putting those two terms together, this is the concern that was expressed to us by the rail industry, was that actually these are very different concepts and deserve different treatments. And just doing a wholesale sort of one means the other is going to create situations where they're treating security with the same, brush as safety in a way that might not be appropriate. Is that a concern of the department?
The term security is currently used in the Railway Safety Act, where the provisions are intended to deal with security. So despite there not being a definition of security, the terms are used where it is intended to deal with, malicious actors or intent. For example, security measures or security documents. Those terms are already included in the Railway Safety Act to distinguish provisions and definitions that are intended to deal with security.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Any other questions, comments, colleagues? Seeing none, we will go to a vote on Clause 5. Oh, CPC 1, excuse me.
Okay. Mr. Baraway.
No.
Monsieur Iacono. No. Ms. Koutrakis.
No.
Ms. Murray. No. Mr. Rogers.
No.
Mr. Stroll.
Yes.
Mr. Muse.
Yes.
Dr. Lewis.
Yes.
Ms. Gladue.
Yes.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval.
Oui.
Mr. Bachrach. No. 5 yeas, 6 nays.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
1 carries?
Not carried.
Not carries. Does not carry. Shall Clause 5 carry, colleagues? On division?
Mr. Baraway.
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono. Ms. Koutrakis.
Yes.
Ms. Murray. Yes. Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Stroll.
No.
Mr. Muse.
No.
Dr. Lewis. No. Ms. Gladue.
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval. Oui. Mr. Bachrach. Yes. 7 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you. Clause 5 carries. Clause 6.
Mr. Baraway.
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono.
Oui.
Ms. Koutrakis.
Yes.
Ms. Murray.
Oui?
Yes, it's up to you, Ms.
I'm sorry, I was having a conversation with the...
It's okay. So
with
we are
one
on
of the
clause
staff.
6.
Sorry?
We are on clause 6.
We had
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Stroll.
No.
Mr. Muse.
No.
Dr. Lewis.
No.
Mrs. Gladue. No. Monsieur Barsalou Duval.
Oui.
Mr. Bachrach.
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Clause 6 carries. Go on to Clause 7.
Mr. Baraway.
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono.
Oui.
Ms. Koutrakis.
Yes.
Ms. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Stroll.
No.
Mr. Muse.
No.
Dr. Lewis.
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Mr. Barsalou-Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Bachrach?
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Clause 7 carries. Clause 8. On va aller avec Mr. Barsalou-Duval.
Mr. Barsalou-Duval, that's BQ 1. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to add something. So clause 8, to not be mistaken, I want to add in clause 10 after line 26 in French, which would say any exemption granted under subsection 1 or 2 shall be published in the Canada Gazette within 30 days after it comes into force. That's the proposal that I put forward in terms of an amendment. But there have been some discussions to try and come up with another way of meeting the same objective, namely to publish the exemptions which are granted to railway companies and make them public, but there could be other ways than using the Canada Gazette. So I've got some comprehension for that. So is there some sort of procedure that would allow us to come up with a different version? Does there need to be unanimous consent? Or are there other people who've already got another amendment ready to come forward? Otherwise, I can present one myself.
Badawi.
Let's turn to Mr. Badawi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Barsalou-Duval. And again, I appreciate the amendment. We do support the increase in transparency, of course, for ministerial decisions and welcome the publication amendment to this clause. But we think that publishing on TC's website, as you had just mentioned, as an option, would be more adequate, given it could be more timely and be updated more regularly as required, as it makes it more accessible to the public. So I am prepared to make an amendment, Mr. Chairman, that the minister must, 30 days after it comes into force, make any exemption granted under subsections 1 or 2 accessible to the public through the internet or by any other means that the minister considers appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Badawi. We just have a clarification from the legislative clerk. Where would you be putting that? In the bill.
Well, right where Mr. Barsalou-Duval was going to put, well, section 10. They're
Replacing it, okay. Would you have that in writing, Mr. Badawi?
I can send it to you, yeah, I got it right here. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have it in French, too.
In both official languages. I have Mr. Straw's hand up, and then I'll turn it back over to you. Mr. Straw, is now you were going to be talking about the amendment proposed by Mr. Badawi.
And it was my understanding, Mr. Chair, that amendments were supposed to be submitted in advance and in writing. And so I'm a little concerned that there's clearly been discussions between the Bloc and the government on this amendment, as evidenced by having translated copies of that here. We haven't had the opportunity to review any of that. So I think, you know, it wasn't our understanding that this is how this proceeded when we were dealing with legislation, because all amendments are supposed to go through the legislative clerk to ensure that they are in order, that they don't impact other sections of the bill. So I guess I'm a little concerned that now, after being told very clearly how amendments were to be submitted, that we're now able to add things on the fly. So perhaps you can clarify what's going on in terms of whether this is even in order, and if so, it certainly seems to go against the spirit of what we were trying to accomplish and what we were all told we had to do in order to have our amendments cleared. It was quite a process, I have to tell you, Mr. Chair, several days worth of back and forth, and to now just have it happen on the floor seems to be a departure from what was done. So I would look to your guidance there, and perhaps if this is the way it could have been done, why did the rest of us go to the trouble of working with Legislative Council to make our proposals known ahead of time?
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. So the legislative clerk would like to see what Mr. Badaway had proposed in writing before determining whether or not it's in order. If it's okay with the committee, we'll suspend for 1 to 2 minutes to allow them to conduct that work. Is that okay with you, Mr. Strahl? Okay, we will suspend for 1 minute and we'll let them figure out what's going on here. The meeting is suspended for 1 minute. First, I'd like to respond to Mr. Strahl's request as to whether or not this was in order. The legislative clerk has confirmed it is indeed in order. For the second part of Mr. Strahl's remarks, I'll turn it over to Mr. Barcy-Duval, peut-être pour clarifier qu'est-ce qu'il disait.
Perhaps he can clarify what he was saying when he actually proposed that motion. Thank you, Chair. The amendment that was proposed was to make sure that the safety exemptions are rendered public so the man or woman in the street, any stakeholder, could be informed about the existence of an exemption. This morning we had discussions with government representatives who said that from their point of view it would be preferable to perhaps go for a publication on the Transport Canada website. It would be more flexible, more agile, And I thought, well, yes, that makes sense because publishing in the Canada Gazette, it takes time. There's delays. There's lots of different stages that you have to go through first. So you would be getting the information much later via the Gazette compared to a simple publication on the government website. So I saw this as a sub-amendment myself. Perhaps we could then have a clearer interpretation now from a procedural point of view. Thank you very much.
Strahl, I just want to confirm with all members that the amendment has been submitted to all members in both official languages. I'll turn it over to Mr. Strahl and then Mr. Badaway. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. Oh, and
thank you. And I do have the amendment. This again, if this is the way we can do it, that's good to know. The amendment that I have from the clerk now says that the minister must 30 days after it comes into force make any exemption granted under subsections 1 and 2 accessible to the public through the internet or by any other means that the minister considers appropriate. This could mean putting them at the front desk of the Transport Canada office at Ottawa and saying anyone who wants can walk in and get it. By putting that in, by putting the by any other means that the minister considers appropriate, I think that completely renders the intention useless. A minister could do whatever he deems appropriate, may be very inaccessible and not on the internet. It says, or by any other means that the minister deems possible. It doesn't say the Transport Canada website. So I don't know why it's being this vague. If Mr. Barcelou-Duval understood that we're going from the Gazette to the Transport Canada website, the amendment should say that. But instead, it gives incredible latitude to the minister to basically do whatever he wants. So I think if the intent, the original, we would have had no problem supporting. Transport Canada website, we could have perhaps lived with, but this giving the minister the ability to determine what is appropriate when we're talking about public information and increasing transparency, I think makes the amendment completely useless, and we would vote against it.
thank you, Mr. Strahl. I'll turn it over to Mr. Bachrach, suivi par Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Mr. Bachrach.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was going to say something very similar to Mr. Strahl. I think the intention is there, and the way that Mr. Barcelou-Duval articulated it was something that I could get on board with. But then when we see the actual wording of the amendment, it just feels like the wording allows for some outcomes that would be contrary to the spirit of the amendment. This is about transparency, and I think publishing it on the Transport Canada website is fine. And with any other means the minister deems necessary would be fine. It's the word "or" that is really problematic. It basically gives the minister the option to either publish it on the internet, which is a big place, or any other way the minister sees fit. And I think that is just simply too broad. I can't imagine the government would exercise those kind of options, but I would prefer something that was more narrowly defined. The intention here is clearly that it be the Transport Canada website, and the intention is that any other means of publication be in addition to that. And if the wording was thus, I could easily support it. But the way that it's written now, it just feels like there's too much room for outcomes that wouldn't support the spirit of what Mr. Barcelou-Duval is trying to do.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. So to try and shorten the debate and have an efficient solution that would be of benefit for everyone, instead of saying Canada Gazette in my amendment that I proposed originally, we could say shall be published on the website of Transport Canada. But it is my own amendment, I can't actually propose a sub-amendment. Perhaps somebody else could propose that for me, and that would sort everything out.
Oui, Madame Coutrec.
Yes, Madame Koutriakis. Thank you, Chair. I agree with this proposal from my colleague. Just replace the word internet with Transport Canada and replace the word or with and, in French.
Just going to confer with the legislative clerks. Thank you very much, Ms. Koutrakis. So the first thing we need to do is dispense with the amendment that we currently have on the table. If we have unanimous consent to do that, we can then propose another amendment that perhaps would gain the confidence of committee members.
That's fine.
Yes, Mr. Bachrach.
Not propose an amendment to the amendment that's currently on the floor?
Not if we already have an amendment that's on the table.
Okay. Only one amendment at a time? No.
Sub-amendment.
Okay.
Okay, so does somebody want to propose unanimous consent perhaps to remove,
That's fine.
withdraw?
Yeah, I'll propose that. since I
Okay,
made it.
so proposed by Mr. Badaway. Do we have unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment proposed by Mr. Badaway?
Yes.
Okay, I see unanimous consent. Great. Now we're starting fresh with amendments.
Sub-amendment.
I guess I can go to Mr. Bachrach or Mr.
Trust me to
Barcelona-Duval.
take a crack at it?
Yeah, it has to be Mr. Bachrach because it can't be Mr. Barcelona-Duval. He can't
Okay.
amend his own
Well,
motion.
I think very much along the lines of what Ms. Koutrakis was saying. The original proposed amendment would state that, quote, any exemption granted under subsection 1 or 2 shall be published in the Canada Gazette within 30 days after it comes into force. And I would sub-amend that to read, any exemption granted under subsection 1 or 2 shall be published on the Transport Canada website within 30 days after it comes into force, and by any other means that the minister considers appropriate. Does that work?
I see a lot of nodding heads. Well done, Mr. Bachrach.
Nodding
Does
heads
that-
can mean
However,
things.
I have Mr. Strahl who would like to join in. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours, sir.
No, I just think the ordering there, that it should be on the website and then the 30 days should be at the end of that sentence. It shouldn't be on the website in 30 days and then however else not captured by the 30 days. So I think just the ordering, the words are fantastic. It's just the ordering that I'm concerned about.
It's rare that you get a smile from Mr. Bachrach, Mr. Strahl, for that smile. But I see a lot of nodding heads, all jokes aside, Mr. Strahl, so I think everybody's in favor of that reorganizing of the wording.
Can I just reread?
Yeah.
The whole thing, so we
No.
So the legislative clerk is going to propose reading it to everyone to see if we've gotten it the way that the Goldilocks porridge, as we... Come on, we haven't pulled that one out in a while, right?
Okay, I think I have it. So I think I have it. So it would read, once amended, 10, any exemption granted under subsection 1 or 2 shall be published on the Transport Canada website or by any other means that the minister and by any other means that the minister considers appropriate within 30 days after it comes into force.
Okay. So we have the wording proposed for the amendment. So we'll go to recorded vote in the sub-amendment.
Mr. Baraway? Mr. Iacono? Ms. Koutrakis?
Oui.
Miss Murray,
Oui.
Mr. Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Stroll,
Yes.
Mr. Muse, Dr. Lewis, Miss Gladue,
Oui.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval, Mr. Backrack, 11 yes, 0 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So now we'll go to the vote on the amendment as amended, and I will turn that back over to the clerk.
Mr. Baraway? Monsieur Iacono? Miss Koutrakis?
Oui.
Miss Murray?
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Straw?
Yes.
Mr. Muse?
Oui.
Dr. Lewis? Miss Gladue?
Oui.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Merci beaucoup. So now we'll go to a vote on whether or not Clause A shall carry as amended.
Mr. Baraway? Monsieur Iacono? Miss Koutrakis?
Oui.
Miss Murray?
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Stroll?
Yes.
Mr. Muse?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis? Miss Gladue?
Yes.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. So, colleagues, we have no submitted amendments for clauses 9 to 22. So I'll ask colleagues whether or not we have unanimous consent to group them all. Do I have unanimous consent to group clauses 9 to 22? Yes. Okay. We have
And
unanimous
pass them on division.
on the vision. Thank you, Mr. Straw. Shall clauses 9 to 22 carry? And I will turn it over to the clerk for the recorded vote.
Can we go
On
on
division?
division?
No, it has to be unanimous. On division means I'm not in agreement with it.
Oh, so the clerk is saying that on division means you're not in agreement, which means that
No. But in the House, we pass things on division all the time.
But it means you're not in agreement. You don't want to vote.
And it's on the list of, it's on the sheet that we were given as an option.
So I'm going to turn it over to the clerk and follow the guidance of our legislative clerks and have a vote on clauses 9 to 22, recorded votes.
So it's because so. Perfect. Okay. So, Mr. Baraway. Can we start the vote?
What's that?
Can I start?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Monsieur Iacono? Miss Koutrakis?
Oui.
Miss Murray?
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Stroll?
That works for me.
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Dr. Lewis?
No.
Miss Gladue?
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. We'll now go to clause number 23, and for that, I will turn it over to Mr. Backrack for NDP 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the proposed amendment would read, regulations made under subsection 1 shall require companies to publish the contents of their safety management systems and any information that is necessary to explain the operation of the system. And this relates to testimony the committee heard from witnesses who were concerned by the fact that safety management systems for the rail sector remain proprietary documents, despite the fact that they're also the I think it's fair to say that they're the dominant tool for ensuring safety of rail workers, communities, and the environment. And so this would simply provide much-needed transparency and allow the Canadian public and those who are affected by the rail sector to better understand the primary system that is said to be protecting their safety. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. So I have a ruling on this particular amendment that I'd like to share with Mr. Bachrach and committee members. Bill C-33 amends several acts, including the Railway Safety Act. The amendment proposes through regulations to require railway companies to publish the content of their safety management systems. The Act is amended in several clauses of the bill to add the concept of security management systems without amending any of the provisions of the Act related to the safety management systems. As the House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 770, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. In the opinion of the chair and in the context of the bill, adding a new regulation or new regulations to provide for the publication of these safety management systems is a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill as adopted by the House at second reading. Therefore, I rule the amendment is inadmissible.
Of you, Mr. Chair.
It was a friendly ruling.
It was. I know it was meant as friendly as possible. Clause 12 of C-33 does deal specifically with safety management systems. So, to the degree that we can disagree with the legislative clerks, it seems that safety management systems are very much within the scope of this bill that we're debating. If I remember it correctly, Clause 12 provides the ability for the minister to direct rail companies to make changes to their safety management systems in instances where those systems are found to be deficient. So if the government looks into the rail company safety management systems and finds deficiencies, the minister, under this bill that we're debating, can order the companies to amend or make changes to those safety management systems. So it was because of that clause that we had hoped that safety management systems would be deemed within scope. And certainly there are other changes and amendments that we're considering that are similarly tangential, but seem to be considered within scope. So I don't know, other than expressing my disappointment, how else I can argue this point. But this is a really important change that would be a huge improvement for the way that that our rail sector manages safety. And if it doesn't take place, what's going to continue to happen is that the primary system for ensuring safety is going to remain a black box. No one's going to be able to see how rail companies are regulating themselves and protecting rail communities, rail workers, and our environment from disasters like we saw in Lac-Mégantic. And so, short of challenging the chair's ruling, which I know that he made in good faith and in consultation with the experts, I don't know where to go with this other than to express my deep disappointment. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll hand it back to you in the hope that you will change your ruling. Now would be the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. You do have the option to challenge the chair.
I hereby challenge the chair.
Okay. I'll turn it over to clerk to vote
Okay.
on whether or not to sustain the ruling of the chair.
Mr. Baraway? Yes. Mr. Iacono? Yes. Ms. Koutrakis?
Yes.
Ms. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Stroll?
Yes.
Mr. Muse?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Ms. Gladue?
Oui.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval,
Non.
Mr. Backrack,
No.
so we have 9 yeas, 2 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So the chair's ruling is sustained. We will now move to Clause 23, colleagues. Shall Clause 23 carry? Now we're going to the clause itself.
That's fine.
Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Baraway,
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono,
Yes.
Miss Koutrakis,
Oui.
Miss Murray,
Oui.
Mr. Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Stroll,
No.
Mr. Muse,
No.
Dr. Lewis,
No.
Miss Gladu,
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval,
Oui.
Mr. Backrack,
No.
Six yeas, 5 nays.
Clause 23 carries. So, colleagues, we now have clauses 24 to 54 and no submitted amendments. So I'll ask for unanimous consent to group them all into one. Do I have unanimous consent? I see no objection. So we'll go to a recorded vote on clauses 24 to 54 grouped. I'll turn it over to you, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Baraway, Monsieur Iacono, Miss Koutrakis,
Oui.
Miss Murray,
Oui.
Mr. Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Stroll,
No.
Mr. Muse,
No.
Dr. Lewis,
No.
Miss Gladu,
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval,
Oui.
Mr. Backrack.
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Carried. On a rendu l'article 55.
So we're now at clause 55, block number 2. So over to you, Mr. Barsalou Duval. Thank you. The objective of this amendment, if we look at the initial clause compared to the amendment, is basically to remove the element. If we look at line 4 on page 38, just a moment, I need to find the right line myself, where it says estimates. So the minister can take an order if they believe that it's important to take immediate action to deal with a threat or reduce a direct or indirect risk to the security of marine transportation. So basically here we're trying to say that we think that the minister is only considering to add that power. We think it's an important power that should be conferred upon the minister so that they can act based on consideration. It doesn't need to be proven. But we would like to put some more parameters around that power, and we'll come back to that in later ones as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the only comments that I can make are that this bill was, in fact, created on the basis that the reasonableness standard will be used in all these determinations. Second point is that the reasonableness standard is what is generally being used in Canada's judicial system. And my last point is that correctness would mean that the minister would essentially have no jurisdiction to exercise the power given that the threshold would be too high, making it, in fact, Mr. Chairman, unusable. So therefore, I can't support this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. Mr. Barsalou Duval.
Je présume qu'on a des gens,
I presume that we have people from the public service here could perhaps speak more on this, because we could have a partisan debate on our interpretation compared to interpretation on the other side of the House. But if we could have some clarification from the officials here on the impact of this amendment, the possible impact, perhaps that could clarify the vote to be taken by the other members of the committee.
Over to you, Ms. Heft.
Thank you for the question. The minister's power has been set out here for the minister to believe that the immediate action is required. It's a standard language for an order power found in several different legislation where the Minister of Transport has powers to take action. With respect to the standard of reasonableness or correctness, it's correct to say that these are generally reviewed by judiciary on the standard of reasonableness.
Thank you, Ms. Heft. I'll turn it over to Mr. Badaway.
And that was the clarification that I wanted to really emphasize, is that it's the reasonableness versus the correctness, and I think that was just clarified by the member of the team. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Mr. Bachrach.
I'm just wondering whether our officials could expand on the difference between reasonableness and correctness for those of us who are less familiar with the concepts in a legal sense.
Ms. Heft, I'll turn it back over to you.
Does one imply a higher standard?
Upon judicial review, where the standard of correctness is used, there must the reviewing court must be of the opinion that that was the absolutely correct decision, and that there were no potentially reasonable other decisions that could have been made. It is the exact same decision that a court would have made if in the same situation. Generally, the standard of reasonableness allows for, in a situation where a decision is made based on all of the facts that the information available to the minister would have allowed for this decision to have been considered reasonable in the given situation.
Satisfied, Mr. Bachrach? Okay. Any other questions, comments, colleagues? Seeing none, we will go to a vote on Block 2.
Mr. Badaway?
No.
Monsieur Iacono? Ms. Koutrakis?
No.
Ms. Murray?
No.
Mr. Rogers?
No.
Mr. Straw?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Dr. Lewis?
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Bachrach?
No.
10 nays, 1 yes. Not carried.
Not carried. We'll now go to Clause 55. I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Badaway? Yes. Monsieur Iacono?
Oui.
Ms. Koutrakis?
Oui.
Ms. Murray?
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Straw?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Dr. Lewis?
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Bachrach?
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Clause 55 carries. So, colleagues, clauses 56 to 60 have not had any amendments submitted, so I'll ask for unanimous consent to group them all into one vote. Do I have unanimous consent? I have unanimous consent, so I'll turn it over to you, Madam Clerk, for a vote on clauses 56 to 60, please.
Mr. Badaway?
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono? Oui. Ms. Koutrakis?
Oui.
Ms. Murray?
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Stroll?
No.
Mr. Muse?
No.
Dr. Lewis?
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Bachrach?
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Clauses 56 to 60 carry. I will now turn it over to Mr. Bachrach for NDP 2 on Clause 61. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours.
Section relates to circumstances under which the minister may direct vessels if the minister feels there's a risk, those vessels pose a risk, and it expands the definition of what risks may be considered. And so the amended text would read, if the minister has reasonable grounds to believe that a vessel is a threat or poses a direct or indirect risk to the environment, the well-being of coastal communities, the security of marine transportation, including to any person, goods, vessel, or marine facility, or to the health of persons involved in the marine transportation system, the minister may direct the vessel ... And so this just introduces environmental concerns and the well-being of coastal communities to the list of reasons why the minister may direct a vessel.
Just I'll ask for the committee's indulgence as I confer with the clerk. Thank you. Apologies, colleagues. We're going to suspend for 2 minutes because there's just additional discussions that are required for this amendment proposed by Mr. Bachrach, NDP 2. Thanks. We'll suspend for 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Bachrach, and thanks to all members for your patience on this. We'll now go to comments or questions on NDP 2. Yes, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, it seems like I'm saying this more times than I usually do, but I do support the intent of what the member has brought forward. However, you know, I just don't think it's in the right act. So I'm sure it can be declared inadmissible, but again, we agree with the intent of the NDP, and for this reason, we're willing to hear the debate and go from there. So I'd like to hear a bit more from Mr. Bachrach, because I know there's a few amendments throughout this whole bill that they're making within the Transportation Security Act that doesn't deal necessarily with environmental issues at all, but there is an argument to be made that environmental issues can be security of people as well. And I think a lot of the members from British Columbia, as well as our colleague here, Ms. May, from the exactly, that would agree that the both can be correlated. So I'd like to hear some more on this, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be interested to see, and I would support that it would actually go to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. I'll see Mr. Strahl's hands up, and then perhaps I'll turn it over to Mr. Bachrach or even the officials to comment on this. Mr. Strahl.
Yeah, I think obviously the intent is clear. I have a concern, though. I would be interested to hear if the well-being of a community has ever been defined in legislation previously, because I think it could mean just about anything. And what you essentially, when you use the broad terms to the environment and the well-being of coastal communities, that could be in the eye of that of many individuals in that coastal community. Perhaps some work in the transportation sector or in the supply chain, and when they see a ship in the region, they think of economic activity and the job that they have. I just don't. I think it's an incredibly broad term, and what you would end up doing, and perhaps for the intent for a minister is the intent is a good one, but I think we have an obligation to draft legislation that cannot be abused. And I think when you have such broad terms that are ill-defined, you risk that abuse. And so I have concerns with how incredibly broad this is, and how a future government or even this government could use that legislation to completely shut down economic activity in the region with no other option for ships. There's no new anchorages, for instance, so the ships are just circling around and burning fuel and harming the environment somewhere else. So I do think this is much too broad and gives much too much power to the minister to regulate in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. And I'll turn it over to any of the witnesses that we have here, perhaps to respond to the definition of the well-being of community and whether or not that's been used in other pieces of legislation. So, Mr. Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, the Canada Shipping Act, just to speak more broadly to the issue at play, the Canada Shipping Act already provides the legal framework for regulating marine navigation and safety for the purposes of protecting the public interest, using the term public interest rather than well-being of communities, and the environment, where the community well-being and the environment can be taken into consideration as an element of the public interest.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Bachrach.
I think this is a very interesting discussion, and I'm certainly open to entertaining different words to convey the same concept. I would add that the original text in the bill includes if the minister has reasonable grounds to believe that a vessel is a threat or poses a direct or indirect risk to the security of marine transportation, including to any person, goods, vessel, or marine facility, or to the health of persons involved in the marine transportation system. So this is already casting a pretty broad net. It's saying that any marine infrastructure, if that's at risk, then the minister can direct vessels to go elsewhere. If so direct or indirect risk to the security of any person, goods, vessel, or marine facility, or the health of persons involved in the marine transportation system. So here we're concerned about the health of the people working on board the ship, but we're not necessarily concerned about the health of the people living on the shore, breathing the emissions from the ship that's been parked on their doorstep for the past 25 days. So I think it's very much trying to get at this idea of expanding just slightly this idea of risk and threat. And I note in the Act we don't have a really good definition of what we mean by security, and already we see the broadening of the concept with the use of the terms risk and threat. I think very clearly what we're trying to do is take this idea of security and this idea of risk and apply it to people who are directly impacted by the shipping sector, and allow the minister the discretion to, in those cases. So another example would be you've got a vessel that has lost power or is somehow compromised and is leaking some deleterious substance, and has decided to head towards a coastal community and park on their doorstep to address the problem. Like here's an issue where this is clearly, it might not be a threat to national security in sort of a military sense, but it's clearly a threat. It's clearly a risk to the place where it's going. It's a risk to the marine environment. It's a risk to the community that lives there. And this would simply provide the minister the ability to act not just on the interest of the people on board the ship, but the interest of the people who live directly on the shore that could be impacted by this activity. So I don't know if there's another word other than well-being. Perhaps safety is a concept, or health. We already use health in the amendment, in the bill. It says the health of persons involved in the marine transportation system. So arguably, the concept of health has a definition. So perhaps if we port that over and say the health of coastal communities, or even the health of the residents of coastal communities, maybe that would be more in line with the direction that we're going. But I would add, Mr. Chair, that I didn't hear you rule this as inadmissible. So it feels like we're having a debate on admissibility prior to clarity on whether it's admissible.
Nope, we're not having a debate on that. We're having a debate on.
Well, like if it's coming, it's coming, and like if the chair's going to say that it's inadmissible, he's eventually going to get there. But I haven't heard him say that yet, and it sounded like he was on the brink of calling a vote on this amazing amendment that we've put forward. And so I would just ask the chair, given the time, that we move to a vote on the amendment as worded.
So we have a lot of people who want to talk about this, which is good news, Mr. Bachrach. So
Fabulous.
I'm going to turn over to Ms. Murray, and then I have Ms. Gladue, Mr. Badaway, and Mr. Baxter-Duval. Ms. Murray, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you for this amendment and for including the environment. And I wondered what you thought about a potential friendly amendment to your amendment that would rather than say to the environment, would say to the marine ecosystem.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. So we'll have a discussion on that sub-amendment. I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Bachrach.
Well, I'm not sure how formal we want to be, Mr. Chair, but I think Ms. Murray's proposal that we reference marine ecosystems is perfectly fine, and I would support changing. It's simply a different way of articulating the same concept, and it might be a little bit more specific, so I'd be happy to change the wording of our amendment accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Just point of clarification, where did you want to insert that, Ms. Murray?
Where it says to the environment, the well-being of coastal communities, etc., would be to the marine ecosystem.
Okay.
A bit more specific about the marine life, the fish, the animals, the whales.
Thank you very much, Ms. Murray. I'll turn it over to Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And well, first off, I want to congratulate everybody. bouncing this around and trying to get this done. I'm assuming, as Mr. Backrap said, because you haven't declared it inadmissible, it is admissible, so that's great. And I want to congratulate Mr. Backrap for doing this and Mr. Murray for putting the amendment on. But I do want to take it a step further, if I can have the blessing of the committee. We do have a third member of Parliament here from BC. We've heard from two of them. I would love to hear from the third one. So if the committee would so give Ms. May that grace, I'd love to hear from her. Mr. Chair.
Okay. So I'll make the decision to provide Ms. May with 2 minutes speaking time on this.
Thank you. I won't need 2 minutes. I know you all have a lot on your plates, and I appreciate the indulgence of all committee members, because I'm here under the terms of a motion passed by this committee that gives me the right to speak to the amendments that I bring that are deemed moved, but not to others. So this is a rare chance, and I appreciate it very much. I would just say to Mark Strawley, look, this is a weird thing that these anchorages on our coastline, nobody looks at them and says, well, there's a job I've got, because this is free parking. There's no benefit to the community whatsoever. The anchorages are not of benefit to any coastal community and do detriment to quality of life, to the marine environment, threats to the southern resident killer whales from the noise of the freighters, damage to the benthic organisms from dragging anchor. There are multiple issues here. We heard about them from one of the witnesses before the committee. So specifically to NDP2, what it's doing is drawing attention in Bill C-33, in that key portion where they're already looking, as Taylor said, at questions of health and security, the well-being of coastal communities and security of marine transportation. These vessels in a storm can drag anchor. We've had collisions. We've had many near misses, and we've actually had collisions where we could have easily had an oil spill from the vessels colliding. There are numerous examples in real life, not hypotheticals, of where broadening the discretion, what the minister is looking at, what's being looked at in this question is the environment, the well-being of coastal communities, I think is really well expressed, including, of course, the health of the people on board. And frankly, it's in no one's economic interest to have these ships just sitting there. It doesn't help the grain growers in the prairies one little bit. Port of Vancouver doesn't have a good, effective system right now for bulk goods. And so the bulk goods, two main types, grain and coal, have a history of backing up. And as they back up and back up and back up, they sit in the waters of the Salish Sea up and down the coast of Vancouver Island, proliferating in number. I'm going to shut up there, but anything we can do in C-33 to give more scope to better solutions than the current practices would be much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Ms. May.
On a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Strahl.
Just a clarification. Ms. May actually herself referenced the motion that we are not in a situation where another member can designate their time to an independent member to give them standing at the committee, which has been done previously. So I just I know that you gave her the authority, but it's my belief that there needs to be unanimous consent in order for that to happen again in the future. Obviously, out of respect for you, we let Ms. May go use her full 2 minutes. But I would suggest that given the number of amendments we have that are dealing with this, that we do follow the rules of the committee, which is that there is unanimous consent required for independent members to speak, except when they're speaking to their own amendments. So that is something I would like to say. And also, Mr. Chair, I note the time, it being 5:35. We are past the normal hour of adjournment. So I would like to move a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. I just want to confirm that I did seek the guidance of the clerks to my left and my right before providing the time to Ms. May to speak. We will now go to a vote. As a dilatory motion, there's no debate. We will go to a vote, and I'll turn it over to clerk for that.
Mr. Baraway?
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono?
Oui.
Ms. Koutrakis?
Oui.
Ms. Murray?
Oui.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Strahl?
Yes.
Mr. Muse?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Ms. Gladu?
Oui.
Monsieur Barsalou-Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack? Yes. 11 yes, 0 nays.
And with that, this meeting is adjourned.
I just want to make one point. I'm always happy to hear from Miss May. I think she's lovely,
We're
and she
adjourned.
always has very relevant things to say in relation to the environment. But I think the rule is Rule 114. I do believe that substitutions have to be members of the committee, and so I'm just like moving forward. I think that we should have some process into ensuring that her input is duly noted and that it's not outside of the scope of authority.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis.
Thank
With
you.
that, the meeting is adjourned.